So hello everybody. For those of you who are new on the webinar, this is something we've been doing for quite a few weeks now. We've actually been doing this for a year and a half, but we've been doing it complimentary during the COVID crisis, just to make sure that we're helping as many of you as we can get updated information. Think about, while you're home and you've got this time to plan and build your foundation for your wealth. What a great slide that is. There's no better time. There was an interesting post that I was reading a couple days ago. A woman had written she was sick and tired of hearing all of these positive people talking about the time they had to get their shit together. She said she's at home with her 3 kids and her husband's in a depression because he's been laid off work, and she's like, all she's doing is like looking after her kids and her husband, and she's not getting anything done, and she wants all of us who are putting out positive energy to just shut the fuck up. So I thought that was really funny, and I felt really bad, but it'd be like, oh my goodness, if we were all in that boat, it would be a total disaster. So hopefully, some of the positive energy and information that we're putting out there and the tools that we're offering are going to be helpful when you're ready for them. And if that's today or tomorrow or somewhere down the future, we're all here to help you navigate these crazy times. So I'm Liza Rogers. I'm the founder of WREN, the Women's Real Estate Network. And we've been navigating through this and sort of putting real estate stuff not necessarily on hold, but we're not rushing out and buying things right now. We're getting our ducks in a row. And so today we always have great guests, and usually from different places across Canada. So today joining us for the first time is Corey Ferrier, and he's the Managing Director of Braintree Insurance Services, or sorry, Braintree Financial Solutions, and he's the Managing Director of the Insurance Department. And he's going to be sharing with us a presentation about insurance, which is really important for those of you who don't have it or maybe don't have the right kind. And of course, we have Lynn Trevison from Braintree Financial Solutions. Lynn's been here lots from Toronto, and Corey's in Toronto as well. And Lynn has been here almost every week, sharing some solutions and sharing her dreams and goals to keep us inspired. We're all talking about what kind of things we want to do in the future to keep working towards those goals. And of course, you will probably all recognize Sherry Krause. Sherry's been with us right from the beginning, and Sherry's in Victoria, and Sherry is a realtor and investor, and we've talked to Sherry about all kinds of things. We've talked about seniors advocacy and private lending and joint ventures and partnerships and the new landlord tenant things that are going on, and we always have great information. So we're going to actually start with Sherry today, and she's just going to give us a little bit of an update from her perspective, and then we're going to shift over to Lynn, and Lynn's going to introduce Corey. And so if you're just joining us, just please feel free to find that question box and say hello, and at some point while we're going through some of the slides, I will get to your questions and comments, and please don't be shy, and we'll take about an hour to go through this. So Sherry, give us an update, give us some news. How are things in Victoria?
Well, it's raining at the moment, but yeah, so I just want to say a couple of things. Number one is that if you saw me coughing, it's just allergies. It's not, I'm not sick. But anyway, so what are things doing in the market? So basically we're down, they're saying that our sales will end in April about 30 to 40% down from where we were last April. No surprise there, really. So normally we end up April doing about between 650 and 700 sales, and I think we're at 150 now. So it is quite low. So in March we did 300 and some, so that's not really a surprise, but prices are holding. We've still seen the odd multiple offer, sad but true, and that sort of thing. So what I found since last week when we talked to everyone is that I think the initial fear is lifting a little bit. People can see light at the end of the tunnel, and although we won't be going back to the way things were prior to COVID-19, I think that we're going to start to see things chugging along and moving forward. People are going, oh, okay, there's light at the end of the tunnel. I need to keep moving forward. And so we've seen more activity. Phones are starting to ring, and a lot of realtors are sort of feeling the same way. We've had time to adapt now and figure out how we're going to do things going forward, because there's still no open houses, and I doubt that those will be allowed back much before the fall or end of the year. You know, we have other ways of doing things, and walkthroughs, virtual open houses. People are finding ways to do it. Conference calls, meetings with people on the screen, or social distancing. I really found it when the weather is nice, you can get out there and it feels like there's kind of life outside of your four walls. And so when you go out for walks or whatever you're doing for exercise, it's really quite nice. So things are still happening. I feel we are still doing deals, just not near as many, and it takes much longer. So we're seeing things like subject removal for financing is almost taking 3 weeks, sometimes longer. And it's just, everybody is backlogged. Banks are backlogged with doing deferral paperwork for deferrals on mortgages. They're backlogged with doing all sorts of stuff, and they're short staffed. They have people that are off sick or have to be looking after family or whatever. So things are taking much longer. And so we're having to ask for extensions on a lot of things. And also lawyers' offices are taking a lot longer. I had someone contact 3 lawyer offices to do a closing in 2 weeks, and was told by all of those offices that they couldn't do it in that time frame because they are running shorter staffed. And yeah, so it took a while to find a lawyer who could do it in the time frame we needed. So those kinds of things, just be aware, stuff is getting done. It's just taking longer, that's all.
Taking longer, and there've definitely been some interesting modifications, right? Like we had Anna from BPM Lawyers on last week, and I'm still amazed at some of the things they're allowing, like unwitnessed signatures from people overseas, and then there's this process that they have to go through. But I mean, that would never have been allowed a month ago even. And so the changes that we are seeing, some good, some interesting. So it'll be, you know, really interesting to see what stays. The virtual real estate tours, I think that, I mean, that's going to be a trend for sure, isn't it? Where people from overseas can look at a property more virtually. So there's going to be lots of interesting trends.
Yeah.
Very cool. Yeah, go ahead, Sherry.
Speaking of trends, just one that I think everyone should keep their eye out on. You've heard me talk before about how tech industry is a big industry here in Victoria, but it's not really easily seen. And so people don't think of Victoria as a tech city. But what's happening is there's more and more talk now of opening or building tech parks and tech complexes, et cetera, downtown now in the city of Victoria. And one of the things that I wanted to bring out to people is like our tourism is dropping, right? Like tourism is kind of dead for this year. You can pretty much wipe it out. So the cities and municipalities are going to be more open to tech because that's how they're going to get some revenue happening. And tech people, when they come here, it's like, wow, it's beautiful. We want to live in Victoria. They buy houses or they rent, and they need places to live. So I do feel that, you know, keep your eye on that. That's going to be a trend, and it's still going to bring a lot of people into the city. And they need places to live just like anybody else.
Yeah, and they spend lots of money.
The other thing is, yeah, for people who have now discovered working from home and it works well for them, some people it does not work well. But for those that do, I think we're also going to see a trend to those people, if they keep working from home, they're likely going to want a little bit of a larger space in order to accommodate working from home, because that wasn't part of their setup prior to COVID.
Yeah, that's also a huge trend. I mean, some of my sister, for example, she's a lending administrator with Coast Capital, never would have been able to work at home. I mean, it was not, you know, non-negotiable. And now she's working from home, and when she goes back, when this all kind of goes back to normal, right? We're kind of doing air quotes because we know there's no normal. There's no way she's going to need to take the bus in 40 minutes a day to go and do her job at the same, in the office every day. She might need to go in a couple of days a week, but everybody's going to be negotiating for a little bit more of the working from home.
Yeah.
And it'll be really interesting to see the kind of structures that go up in people's backyards, right? I'm just going out to my home office. It's interesting. I was reading Business in Vancouver. I was just flipping over to see which one it was, and so much of it was about tech. And so, more tech companies, more gaming companies, more like everything tech. It was just saying, BC has been a leader in this field, kind of quietly. And it's really going to grow. And so, yeah, it'll be really interesting to see which areas people land in, right? I mean, Victoria is so beautiful. Of course, people are going to be there, and I've had a couple of people from Europe contacting me saying, "Hey, Liza, we're thinking of moving to Vancouver this year." I always say, "Great, come on over. Just don't come in November." It's not a great month to see Vancouver at its best. And they're all skiers, so they want to, relocate somewhere in Canada where it's close to mountains, and so they're thinking Vancouver. So, yeah, it's going to be some interesting times. The whole global economy and the remote working that we love talking about so much, right, Lynn? And I know Joan has just arrived. I just saw her arrive. We always talk about being, what is it we talk about? Being location independent. And so this situation that we're in now is going to amplify the people who choose to be location independent, and the companies who allow staff and contractors to be location independent, because we're proving that we can work unsupervised and still get shit done. There was a study, I can't remember which organization it came from, but I had a quick look at it, and it was saying that a number of companies are seeing their productivity from people working at home actually increasing. So, the whole argument for, well, if you're working from home, you're not getting stuff done. People are showing that people are actually getting more done. So it's really interesting to see from that perspective. Cool.
Yeah,
Anything else you want to tell us, Sherry?
Yeah, so commercial real estate, just because of that, commercial real estate is going to get hit the hardest in the real estate sector because of COVID. A lot of the restaurants or smaller service industries that will not survive, it's going to have an impact on commercial real estate. And if now offices that needed 2,000 square feet now realize that maybe they can go down to 1,200 square feet, if they're having people continue to work from home, it's going to have a huge impact on the commercial real estate. So also bear that in mind when you're looking at things. Things like storage units still are a good bet. They're a little bit more recession proof. As weird as it is, mobile home parks, especially if you cater to the 55 plus, are more recession proof because those people have set income. They're on fixed income, so they're not as impacted as what we've seen with people losing jobs. So those kinds of things are still good places to look if you're looking to make a real estate investment.
Fantastic. And Sherry and I were talking yesterday about mobile home parks and storage units, or there's actually a couple in BC that she's looking at for me. I'm going to get some information. And for those of you who haven't been on many of our webinars, we're really passionate about acquiring some mobile home parks. We've been working on acquiring a couple in the US. But with all of this kind of going on, we know that might be a little bit delayed until this gets sorted out. But there are some for sale in BC that we're looking at, and they kind of are recession proof, because if you have to downsize from your expensive home, that kind of trickle down effect, there will be people who will be looking for affordable housing, and mobile home parks can be affordable housing, recreational housing, seniors housing. And so it kind of, as Sherry mentioned, covers, the 55 plus, the recreational user, and people who are having to downsize for financial reasons. So still some good opportunities there. And Sherry, do you want to tell us about your meetup on Tuesday?
Yeah, so on the 28th at 7 o'clock, we're doing our meetup our monthly meetup via Zoom call. So it is a meetup group. So you have to go into meetup.com and find us, which is the Victoria Real Estate Investors Meetup, and register so that you can get the link to join us. And our guest speaker this month is going to be Claire Flelling-Wyatt from Pemberton Homes, who is the broker there for property management. So she handles all of the property management, many units all in town, and has a great staff working under her. But she's in contact with the changes that have been happening to rental market, being a landlord, what are tenants' rights, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm anticipating a ton of questions. So please join us and you'll have an opportunity to ask her questions. So that runs from 7 to 9 on Tuesday night.
So that's 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time.
Correct.
And we will do a little bit of a recap on next Wednesday. So for those of you who aren't able to make it, Sherry will recap some of the information. Everybody who is a landlord and of course tenants as well, we're all looking at next week because, you know, the first kind of bump, you know, it kind of, people still had some income coming in and things, you know, things hadn't really kind of gone sideways. This is going to be, you know, a test to really get some numbers in terms of how many people are going to struggle with making those payments. So it'll be interesting to hear what the information is. And it'll be interesting to see the data from May in terms of what payments have been able to be made and who's struggling. So we've got lots of people saying hello. So just before I turn it over to Corey, I'm just going to check in here. I've got my question box all opened up now. So yes, Julia, she says, I can confirm the lawyer delay. She had to contact 3 before 1 agreed to complete a review of a deal that she was trying to close. And so Julia, that's cool. You're still closing deals, number 1, which is pretty awesome. Shannon from Penticton, here's a question. If the property is vacant, can an open house be held by appointment? So maybe not an open house, but can you go and view a house, a vacant house?
So yes, you can certainly book a showing and view it, but you're not allowed to have an open house, whether it's vacant or not,
Right.
because an open house is considered a gathering. You don't know how many people are going to be there.
Yeah.
So certainly contact your realtor, arrange a showing. Vacant houses are the easiest to see, but you are allowed to go see occupied houses, provided if it's tenanted, the tenants have to agree to let you into their home. And there are usually a COVID procedure when you go in. I don't know any, at least here in Victoria, no one is allowing children to go in and view houses because children just can't not touch stuff. So,
damn kids.
It's important for you and for them. So usually there's before you go see property, your realtor for the buyer's realtor will ask you questions like, have you been traveling? Have you been sick? Are you having symptoms, you know, for the last 14 days, that sort of thing. And then gloves are used, sometimes masks, sometimes not. It depends on how people feel about it. And if it is occupied, we usually try to stress that the sellers leave all the lights on. You don't have to touch light switches or walls because you missed the light switch. And you just leave it the way you found it. So try to keep your hands in your pockets and let the realtor open the door with their gloved hand and you should be good to go.
There you go. All these new protocols.
We are an essential service, you know, and if somebody's got their house on the market, they're going to want it to be sold. Our biggest problem has been with tenanted properties. Yeah.
Great. That's a great answer. So thanks for that. All right. So I think Sherry's probably given us lots of information, lots of good updates and answered some questions. So Lynn, do you want to give us an introduction to Corey and tell us how are things in Toronto right now? Give us the bird's eye view, the quick update of what's going on in Toronto. You had 40 mile-an-hour winds or something the other night, didn't you?
Oh, it was ridiculous, the winds. Yesterday, whatever day it was that I went grocery shopping, and it was windy. And we've had snow and cold, just blowing and disappearing snow. Nothing stayed. But yeah, we had kind of early spring there, and that went away. Now we're back to winter. We'll get to spring again. So Let's see, some of the, well, this is Canada-wide, but one of the new things was an announcement for grants for students. So I've got a university student that has yet to find a summer job, but it sounds like they're getting some relief. So hopefully she'll still find some work and get some experience in the field, but it's certainly, I think, eased the burden for students. So that's good news. Let's see, you talked a little bit about the storage solutions. So I know we had John on, it's probably been a month by now, at least, talking about the MakeSpace offering that we have. John called today to see how I was doing. And Sherry, you mentioned, recession resistance around some of the storage facilities. So he was letting me know that occupancy is actually up for the MakeSpace kind of portfolio of companies that they're building. So good news on the MakeSpace front. Consistent, I think, with what we would have expected, but always good to know. So.
And are they still open to investors?
They're currently off the shelf right now. So annually, typically annually, the issuers go through an update of their offering memorandum. So they just put in the latest financials, kind of bring everything up to date for the legal ease of the documents. So that's the stage they're at. They expect to be open in a week or two. Depends how long and how different and how material changes are. Sounds like there's not a lot of material changes, but they might be, there's some new properties that they're looking at. So it's whether or not they put that into the paperwork as well.
Terrific. And we do have a webinar on that. So I will make sure that I just check on YouTube and make sure that that is unlocked so that people can have a look at that if they are interested. That was with MakeSpace and with John Manley.
Yeah, John Manley from MakeSpace. Well done. Yeah.
And was Jeff on that one as well, or
was it? I think it was Jeff from ICM.
Yeah.
And we've also had Matt from Centurion.
Yes.
Are the three that we've done so far. So with the tours.
Terrific. Yeah. Excellent. Cool.
And then so on the screen as well. So those offerings, those are offered through Braintree Financial Solutions, which is an exempt market dealer, and that's where we offer those private investments to the public. Braintree kind of corporate top of the Braintree group also has a Braintree Insurance Services, and really it's a way for us to kind of become more of a full service provider for our clients. When we look at a portfolio, we certainly look to allocate across cash holdings, public holdings, private holdings, as well as insurance. So I am actually relatively newly licensed for insurance. So I asked Corey, who has a life and insurance before joining Braintree and some experience there, and is now supports both sides of the business, but for insurance is our managing director of insurance, and it has really been the one that has launched Braintree Insurance and supporting that. So I asked him to share one of kind of the first priority offering that I'm learning on the insurance side, because it dovetails so nicely with a lot of our private offerings and then public access that we have as well. It's just a really great fit for many of our clients. So I asked him if he could share that with the rest of us.
Terrific.
Okay. Thank you very much, Lynn, and thanks for having me on for this webinar. This isn't going to be your typical insurance webinar. I just want to mention that at the beginning. This is more about building your wealth, and in this case, we're going to talk about building the foundation of your wealth. I wanted this to have some sort of reference to real estate, so that's where we came up with the theme. But it's all about creating that base that you can build upon, whether you're building on it with your own real estate rentals or building on it with private offerings that can be real estate related. We just want a strong foundation to start with. So why would you need a foundation? I mean, when you're building your wealth, it's really about having a base that you can count on, something that provides some stability. I mean, if if you're building, I don't know if you guys have done much development related conversation on this topic, but the higher you're building, the stronger you need your base to be. And same when you're building even a bungalow or a 2 or 4 story building. I mean, you need a strong base because it gives you the flexibility to build on top of it and build higher and build more wealth in this case, because you know you can count on that on your foundation. And if you know you can count on your foundation, it allows you to kind of take those next steps, maybe jump into that rental unit that you've been unsure about, that you haven't pulled the trigger on because you weren't quite sure about the rest of your portfolio. So this creates a foundation that we can build on, and you can build on that with other investment styles. So the first thing I want to go through is what you need a foundation to be built out of. Like, what are the key characteristics? So those would be capital protection. You don't want something that as your base, as your foundation, that is moving, that is shrinking or growing. And we're seeing this with anybody who invests publicly right now. There's a lot of volatility, and it's changing the size of people's capital of their portfolio. And that doesn't make a very good base. So if we're going to build on something, we need to know how big it is and where it's going to be. So we need capital protection. We need low or no volatility. So that's where the stock market portfolio doesn't really build a great base. We want to protect against inflation as well, because if your foundation is too conservative, it will get eaten away. I guess the closest thing to real estate for this would be having termites, that the taxes and inflation are kind of eating away at your foundation. And if you let that continue to eat away at your foundation, it's gonna have some effect on the building above. So we want to make sure that our foundation is protected against inflation after taxes and after any fees, depending on what strategy we might be comparing it against. And we need it to be liquid, accessible, and leverageable. So picture you're building a bungalow on a plot of land. You want that foundation, you get that foundation in first, and then you want to be able to borrow against that, so you don't have to sell that foundation to build a house on top of it, because now you don't have a foundation anymore. Or if you need it, you can sell the property with the foundation there and build a house somewhere else. So it just gives you more options, and that's why we want to focus on these key features of your foundation. And I'm going to go into each one in a little bit more detail. So for capital protection, we want some guarantees, we want some cash value, we want something that is consistent. It's our base. We don't want it to shrink, and we want it to stay strong. If you're building a skyscraper, if you have some lofty goals related to your wealth, you need a deep and a strong foundation that gives you the strength at the bottom to keep building and adding more and more floors. And if the foundation isn't strong, it can be a challenge as you start pushing into more investment strategies or leveraging into real estate or whatever strategies you might be looking towards. And you just want to make sure it's deep and strong at the base, so that you can be confident building that extra floor, adding that extra layer into your wealth planning or your wealth generation strategy. So we want to make sure that our capital is protected first. That's in our foundation. So this could be the rebar or the steel in the foundation to keep everything together and make sure nothing happens to that foundation. So that's our capital protection. We also need to protect against inflation. Now, inflation changes year to year, month to month sometimes, but if we just take an average, we're looking at an inflation rate a little bit above 2% generally. And the Bank of Canada focuses on trying to keep it around 2%. So we can expect inflation to continue to be around every year and to stay around that 2% mark. And if we have a foundation or base of our wealth that is growing at less than inflation, then it is getting eaten up. Like every year it's worth a little bit less relative to inflation, relative to the buying power of your money. And there are other strategies that can generate wealth in excess of inflation, but we want to make sure our foundation grows with that as well, because we don't want to be about to build another story on our skyscraper and instead need to renovate the basement and renovate the foundation. So we want our foundation to grow with the rest of our portfolio as we're trying to generate and increase our wealth. And the next thing we need in our portfolio, we want it to be low volatility. So we do want it to we do want to grow. We want our foundation to continue to increase, but we don't want it to go through the type of volatility you might see in the public markets. We don't want it to be up and down on a day-to-day basis, because then we can't count on it. And we need to be able to count on our foundation as we're continuing to add stories to our wealth, as we're continuing to add strategies and increase our wealth as well. So we put up a graph for the Toronto Stock Exchange. I've dealt with a lot of public wealth, so this is something I'm used to having conversations with clients about. And sometimes it's positive conversation, sometimes it's negative. It can, and the market can change on a dime, and we're seeing that in the slide presentation in the graph, where your portfolio might be worth X today, and you don't know what it's going to be worth tomorrow. So we don't want that to be in our foundation. We want to know how big our foundation is, and that it's going to be there tomorrow, and what it's going to be worth tomorrow, if that makes sense to everybody. And on top of that, we need the liquidity. So we're borrowing against our foundation potentially, or we might want to cash in that foundation. I mean, if we need it to support the stories above, we need to be able to draw on it at some points and fix up any holes in the rest of our building. So liquidity is very important. There's not much use of having a foundation if you can't use it when you need it, and that's kind of the point behind wanting liquidity. And this is where like GICs can fall short, where we've had client situations where they have an opportunity they want to take advantage of, or they have a challenge that they're trying to work through, and they can't get access to their capital. Well, now they're like, can I pledge my GIC? Like, what do I do? Like, what are my options here? We just need that liquidity to be there, because there's opportunities that come around, and some of them might be once in a lifetime, and you want to take advantage of it. And if your foundation isn't liquid, you can't draw on that, and it might force you to miss out on an opportunity. And the last one is leverageable. So we have our foundation. Sometimes we want to sell part of it, liquidate it, and move it into a different strategy, or adjust what our foundation is doing for us, and maybe move some into different floors of our wealth building strategy. But we also want the option to just leverage against it. I mean, if we have a short-term need for capital, need for cash, and we're just floating a couple months, I mean, we don't want to have to sell your foundation or part of your foundation to cover that need, if it just makes more sense sometimes to borrow against it and pay it back, or borrow long-term into a strategy. I mean, it would be common for somebody who's developing a house to buy the land, put in a foundation, and then borrow against that to build the house. And that strategy works just as well for building your wealth, your wealth and your portfolio, where you have a foundation, you borrow against it, and it helps you build that house on top of it, or that skyscraper, whatever you're looking to do. So we want that flexibility that comes with leverage, or the ability to leverage, and you might not even use it. I mean, it might be a nice to have that you never touch, and that's okay. Like, you don't have to use the leverage. You don't have to leverage your foundation, but it is there if you need it, or it's there if you see an opportunity that makes a lot of sense, and you want to have that extra little bit of capital to chase after that opportunity. So there are a few other asset classes that we have clients thinking about as their foundation, and each of them have different characteristics that make them better or worse as a foundation. GICs are the top one. A lot of people would think, I'll put some money into a GIC, and that's my rock, that's my safe place. The problem is GIC rates are really low right now, probably looking at 2% or less, which doesn't protect against inflation. I mean, depending on what type of account structure you have your GICs in, you might be paying taxes on it, and then it's growing with inflation, or potentially less. Not generally liquid, leverageable, not usually. Sometimes it kind of depends. And there's no tax benefits on a GIC, so you're paying like, if you're getting a a 2% GIC, you might be paying 1% in taxes, and now you're even farther below the inflation rate. Stocks and bonds, again, they don't have the capital protection. I mean, long term, you'd expect them to grow, but the challenge is in the day-to-day, like today versus tomorrow, there wouldn't be any capital protection. Like, we don't know for sure what the capital, if we put $100,000 into the stock market, what it's going to be worth tomorrow. And we don't want to use that as our foundation. Now, it would be expected to protect against inflation over the long term. Typically, the stock market will grow faster than inflation, so that's one check mark, but it is very volatile. So high volatility, both in the return that you could earn and potentially losing or gaining capital. It is liquid though, and it's something accessible. Leverageable, it depends. Tax benefits, kind of, I guess there are some, but it's not, it depends on what type of investment strategy you're using. As for bonds, I mean, it doesn't check off a lot of boxes either. They're low volatility, but there still is volatility in bonds. So this is lending money to companies and governments. It is highly liquid though. Private securities, again, they should protect against inflation over the long term. They should have a rate of return. You would expect to have rates of returns that are higher than inflation on an after-tax basis, but they're not liquid, they're not as accessible, so it's not really a great foundation asset. Again, this is more of a story potentially in your skyscraper of wealth that you're adding, but it might not be, it's not the first story, it's not the foundation of it. Real estate liquidity isn't quite as readily available, but of course you can sell your properties if you need to, but ideally if you're buying a rental property or some sort of real estate investment or your own personal home, it's not something that you want to liquidate, which is why it's good that it is leverageable, which is where you can pull some cash out of those properties potentially. There are some tax benefits, deferred taxes. You get a lot of write-offs when you own real estate rental properties as well, which come in handy. It's protected against inflation. Capital protection, I guess it depends what exactly you're doing in real estate. So we put that as kind of a partial, because generally you'd expect it to have capital protection, but if you're going on a more aggressive strategy, you might not have the same type of protection if you're doing a development play or something like that. But the last one being cash, either in your mattress, under your mattress, and believe it or not, we do have clients that do that. It is something that we see every once in a while, or we see clients that have a significant amount of money in their savings account, in their high interest savings, sometimes 6 or 7 figures that are just sitting there in cash, and that's their comfort money. And that is one thing that definitely gets eaten up by inflation, because there's no return generated on money sitting in your checking account, and there's very little on a high interest savings account nowadays as well. But they have access to it, it's liquid. So there are some good points to all of that as well. So what we are talking about is a strategy that does check all those boxes, and it is available through the insurance wing, which is why I'm here talking as a representative of Braintree Insurance. But it's not your typical whole life strategy, or not your typical insurance strategy at all. This is not what most people would have already. We really kind of we take all the rules and advantages that are available through the insurance business, and then we kind of customize a type of strategy that seems to work very well as a foundation. And it's been something we've helped a lot of clients into and help them build their foundation that they can build upon. So it combines the insurance contract with an investment strategy, and our goal is to minimize the insurance cost. Like the insurance you could think of as a fee, or you're just kind of replacing our life insurance that's already in place, and we want to maximize the investment component, because there are some fairly favorable investment strategies available through the insurance side of the business that aren't really available anywhere else. And we want to take advantage of the guaranteed cash values, our capital protection, the cash value that we can leverage against, and we get a little bonus of actual insurance, oddly enough, where there is a death benefit that's provided as part of the strategy. Though generally we're looking at this strategy as a means to increase your wealth and build your foundation for your wealth, and continue to grow from there. And of course, there are significant tax advantages related to insurance, especially if you are building wealth for the next generation. But that's not always the case. We do often use these types of strategies for somebody who isn't expecting to leave an estate, or doesn't have any children, and they do just want to take advantage of the investment side of this strategy. So we're going to go through a bit of an example. So John and Jenny Smart, so they're about 50 with kids, a healthy income, cash flow positive. They might have a normal type of portfolio with some private investments and public investments, and we're recommending some insurance as this target and some cash. And since we're on a real estate chat, we probably should add in some real estate in there next time. But they have some wealth generated already. They are at 800,000 in financial assets. Some of that's in cash. They actually sold an investment property in this example, and they have 550,000 in investments as well. So we're looking at changing the allocation of the portfolio and adding some into their foundation, essentially. And we have a target for that set at 200,000. Now, the examples and the numbers, they don't really matter that much. We're just trying to convey a point, but people can build this type of foundation anywhere from $500 a month, or transitioning 10 or 20,000, or clients are doing this all up into the millions. And the largest case I've heard of was 160 million in premium into this strategy. And it really is for anybody, and we can tailor it to whatever type of wealth you would want to grow in your foundation. So I just want to get into the numbers a little bit here. And again, we can add a zero, take off a zero, whatever works for you. We're gonna, in this strategy, we're proposing transitioning $50,000 a year for 4 years. That's how we make the allocation into this strategy, and we would have some insurance benefit in this as well, which is why you see a total death benefit that's over $1 million. And there's a term 10 attached to a whole life, and I can get into the detail why we do that later on. But really, it's how we minimize the cost of insurance while maximizing the amount of the capital being allocated to the investment side of these strategies. And you will notice the total cash value is growing. It does take a little while to outstrip the cost of insurance, because there are some costs, and then it continues to grow. And if we plan for somebody making it to 85, for example, this strategy, would be expected to have a cash value of over $1 million. So we are taking $200,000 allocating to this, and our projections would have it coming out a cash value of 1.1 million at 85. So if you're still around and still taking an income, you can leverage against that. You can pull it out in cash, like it's your money. And if you left it for the estate, you also get the additional death benefit, which would bump it up to 1.6 million going to the kids or loved ones. If you notice the rows beside that, the IRR, so internal rate of return, we have one for the death benefit if somebody happened to pass away, but the one that we really pay attention to is the return on cash value. So we've allocated this amount of money into the investment strategy, and depending how long you continue to grow your wealth in here, we are expecting the end-term internal rate of return to be somewhere in the 5% range, give or take. So this is after taxes, after any cost of insurance, as you get into the 80-85 range. As it is accumulating on a tax-free basis, we are focusing on putting the money that we're allocating to the strategy into the wealth building portion of the policy. And we do expect that it would, over the long term, outstrip inflation. Now, there are some costs at the beginning for insurance, and there is some that allow us to take advantage of those. But essentially, these investments would be growing tax-free on a day-to-day basis, on a year-to-year basis, and transitioning to the next generation on a tax-free basis. So to compare this type of strategy to really any other strategy where you might be paying taxes on the end, a 5% rate of return, if you assume, say, a 50% tax bracket, would be the equivalent of a 10% rate of return before tax if you were in bonds or leveraging or loaning against real estate and a second mortgage or anything like that. And of course, depending on the other strategy, you might be paying more or less tax. So it's still a good return that would beat the return of any other sort of base asset, like any of the GICs or bonds, or what most people would consider their conservative investments. And it does so in a way that's tax efficient and can potentially transition to the next generation on a tax-free basis. And you can pull this money out. It's liquid, it's available, and maybe these numbers aren't the same for you, but we can do this with one or two less zeros, or one or two more zeros, and it all works out the same as it is just math, and we adjust the strategy to fit everybody's situation. But it is a great way to provide a foundation. Once there's money in the cash value, it doesn't go down. Like, year one, that 45,000 is there. 45,602. It's there. It's available. That doesn't change day to day. There is a dividend that you get on the investment portion of these policies, and that's typically about 6%, give or take. Manulife is the example we used, and they pay an annual dividend right now of 6.25. But you notice our rate of return isn't quite that high, and that's because there is some cost of insurance that we do try and minimize, but there is some included in this policy structure so that we can get the advantages that we want. And it checks all of our boxes. It has the capital protection. That money in the cash value side is there. We know how much it is. It's not going to change. There's no volatility on the cash value. There is potential volatility on the growth rate, and that can increase a little bit, decrease a little bit. I mean, for 2019, Manulife had an annual dividend of 6.25%. 2018, it was 6.25%, but 2017, it was 6.3. So there is a bit of change in there. And if you go back to maybe 30 years back, I mean, it has changed a little bit, but it typically would change by like 0.1 or 0.05%. It's very steady, so very low volatility. It protects against inflation because those after-tax growth rates are higher than inflation after taxes, after the cost of insurance, as we minimize the cost of insurance. Liquid, we can pull it out if we want it. It's there, it's available, leverageable. You can put a line of credit against it, just like a second property or a rental unit, or your own home, like a HELOC. You can do the equivalent of that on this, and now you don't have to use your own house if you're leveraging your house to do investments. This is a way that you could have an investment that is there and available if you wanted to leverage into another strategy. And the tax benefits of not having to pay taxes on an annual basis, because everything grows tax deferred or tax free. It's like an unlimited TFSA essentially, as long as you don't take too much out, sort of thing. And you can take a significant amount out without taxes, but that gets a little bit more complicated if we look at the detail. And if you hold on to this all the way until your estate, potentially borrowing against it to cover your retirement, the full amount would transition tax-free to the next generation, which is, for real estate people, this is also a strategy that's common because a lot of people want to hold on to their properties, the portfolio they built up for their family. And typically you'd write off, you'd amortize or depreciate your building if you had a few rental units. And when you transition through the estate, you'd typically be looking at a recapture for tax purposes and a capital gain on top of that. So this is a way to kind of cover that off to make sure that the wealth you're generating in your real estate portfolio is going to be multi-generational. Because if it takes you a lifetime to grow up to 10 or 5 or 30 buildings, whatever it happens to be in your case, and you want the full portfolio transition to your family, you're going to have to cover that tax bill, and this is how we do it. But we do it in a way that you can also, that is growing your wealth and that you can use as a foundation, and that you can borrow against when you have an opportunity to take advantage of the market or whatever is going on the real estate side or any other portion of your portfolio. So I know I did cover off a lot there. Of course, this is a very simple version, and just one example. There's a lot of different ways we can tailor this to an individual client needs or an individual situation, bigger, smaller, a lot of different ways to do this type of strategy. But are there any questions that came up through this? Liza, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Corey. That was awesome. I mean, is this a new product with Braintree, or is it something that's been around for a while, or has it been? I mean, it seems like a really great product.
Yeah, so it's available through Braintree. There are a few different companies that do it. It has been around for 200 years. So it wouldn't be new, but it has been getting adjusted in recent years. So they changed the tax code related to this about 4 years back now. They have changed some of the guidelines, and the investments side of the business has changed a little bit, but not a lot. I mean, this is a strategy that has been around and was popular from the 80s on, really. And we are optimizing it. I mean, what typically would happen is somebody would suggest, hey, let's do like a $50 a month, a whole life strategy, and it'll be for covering somebody's estate costs as well, and like their need for insurance as well. It grows a little bit. We take it to the extreme on the growth side. So we want to, as I mentioned in the presentation, minimize the cost of insurance. Like, we're not using this strategy for insurance. We're using it to grow wealth and be your foundation. And we found kind of the optimal ways to do it that way. So this is a strategy that we use at Braintree, and one that I train on and support on with all our advisors. So I'm currently working on doing this for situations all the way up to clients planning to put in millions of dollars, 7 million being the largest we're working on right now, all the way down to clients putting in $500 a month as they're starting to accumulate wealth and build their own foundation. So it's nothing new, but a lot of advisors don't use it or aren't aware of it, and they definitely haven't optimized it, because we came at this business from wealth professionals first. So we're coming at this a bit of a different angle than your typical insurance advisor.
Very cool. So one of the questions is the minimum, it sounds like, is the minimum $500 to get started, or is that just a number that you're using as you can start with as little as 500?
I guess I'm using that example. You can start with as low as 500, potentially lower if you wanted to. Like, there's not really a hard minimum. Like, it depends on the strategy. So like the minimum could be even less than that, or whatever you want it to be. So really, we'd have to talk about your situation, see where you are, and this would be Lynn following up, and see what is the right mix for you. But we can set up a plan like this where you're starting with $500 a month, and then maybe next year or 2 years from now, you're bumping that up to 800, and maybe 3 years after that, you run into some issues when we're putting it down to zero. And I mean, at that point, you already have some money in the policy. It's already growing. You don't necessarily have to make payments. And in the strategy, we only have them making payments for 4 years. And you could do it, instead of doing it in 4 years and transitioning a lump sum, you could build up this policy, this investment strategy, and start with 500, maybe $1,000 a month, whatever it is, and just pay in longer term. Like, maybe we're doing it for 10 years and then we stop, as opposed to doing 4 years at a much higher amount. So there's a lot of flexibility in this strategy, and and yeah, 500 is not a hard minimum. It's just kind of a talking point of one that we see commonly for people that are starting to start this type of strategy and don't have a large nest egg that they're transitioning a bulk of assets from.
So yeah, and I think you know, a couple of people have asked about it being RSP or TFSA eligible. I'm pretty sure you mentioned TFSA in the presentation, but do you want to just clarify on that point for us?
So this isn't a strategy that we can do with registered money. We've called it or some people would call it the unlimited TFSA. We can also do it with corporate money, so it can be a corporate TFSA. But you cannot, this is a separate outside type of investment structure. It would be the equivalent of a non-registered account. So we can't buy these within a RSP account or within a TFSA. So it's just personal assets or potentially corporate money. Those are the two sources that we could build this type of strategy in. And depending what we were doing, if we were leveraging it or putting some money in and pulling some of it out later, you could contribute that money into a registered plan, and that's common as well. But this type of strategy is only available outside of registered plans.
Yeah, and that makes sense when you think about there's, you know, you've got a different tax structure. So where's your RSP is for deferring tax and setting up a different tax strategy there. This is a different tax strategy. So it's the two don't necessarily meet, right? You've got to sit down with a professional, look at what your overall situation is. Where do you think you're going to be in the future? What are the situations of your children or grandchildren or parents or whoever are involved going to be? And a lot of us only sort of think of, you know, one kind of tax strategy being RSPs, but there's so many out there, and that's where it really pays down to sit down with someone who can go over your personal picture and help you with that, because there's so many more options. It's like you mentioned, so many people put their money in the GIC and think, you know, oh, well, I'm getting, you know, I know Van City has one this year right now that's paying 3%. But with inflation, you're still, you know, you might only end up getting 1.5%, and then you pay some of that to taxes. So those are the things that when you sit down with a professional, you see the big picture. There were some great slides in there. The comparison slide with all of the real estate and that was terrific. So I love that. You know, this is the stuff that we have to look at, right? Don't just look at, is it liquid, or if you got is your capital protected? Look at the whole thing and figure out what you need for your particular situation. So I thought that was terrific. Thank you. I know we're at 5 o'clock. We usually run just a few minutes after. A couple more questions here. Can you set it up in a corporation to protect your legacy, to protect the legacy if you die? So you did mention that you can set it up corporately. Do you 100%. Want to? Yes. Yeah. So go ahead.
So that is actually a strategy that becomes more lucrative if you do happen to have a corporation and you are expecting those corporate assets to transition into the next strategy. This strategy works even better. Essentially, you're going to be able to transition your corporate assets after tax assets in the corporation into this type of policy, into this structure, and it's going to grow there tax-free. And whenever you pass away, it's actually like it's owned by the corporation, and it's going to credit your capital dividend account, and it's all the capital and the death benefit that are in this policy are going to transition out of your corporation tax-free to your estate. Which, when you compare this type of corporate investment strategy to really anything else, it really stacks up quite well, because normally you would have on the estate transition, you'd have to sell your passive assets in the corporation, you pay taxes in the corporation, and then you have to pay taxes to take it out, which you're getting hit a couple times, sort of thing. So this can save a substantial amount of tax. And typically when somebody passes away, if they have substantial assets, they would be at the highest tax bracket when they pass away. So we could be saving 50% of your wealth by using this strategy as opposed to another more traditional investment strategy within a corp. So that's probably an hour presentation on its own, to be honest. Bring in an accountant for it too.
A good starting answer. Yes, you can put it in a corporate. I have my insurance through my corporation, and I remember when I sat down with my planner a few years ago, it's like, you got to put it in your corporation. Like, okay, So yes, so cool. So if anybody's got any questions or comments,
I have a question.
Yes, I knew Sherry would have a question. Go for it, Sherry.
Well, so my background is insurance and financial planning. So this, although I haven't been practicing for 14 years now, but anyway, my question is, if you do borrow against this, what kind of interest rate are you looking at these days?
And usually prime plus 1.5 you'd be looking at. It does depend on your overall picture, but that's usually around what you'd be looking at. So maybe a little bit similar or a little bit higher to a HELOC.
Okay, thanks.
Cool. Any other questions? All right, so we will have this, it is recorded, so it will be up on YouTube in a couple of days. So for those of you who have been looking for some of the webinars, I've been just editing them a little bit just to take off some of the technical glitches at the beginning and the end. And so they are up on YouTube, so I'll put the links on the Facebook page, and it's also on the website as well, WREN.club, WREN.club. And a couple things just before we go, I just wanted to remind everybody, it's Earth Day today. So it's almost, it's probably almost over where you guys are, but if you haven't taken a moment to celebrate Earth Day, please take a couple minutes. And, especially right now as the Earth is getting a little bit of a chance to breathe while we are all staying home. So it's a great thing to just remember that, yes, it is Earth Day today, so let's just take a moment and find a minute to recognize that in some way. Wanted to just put our thoughts out, if everybody can just, think about what's going on in Nova Scotia. We're all thinking about family and friends out there, so I don't know if we've got any Maritimers on the call today, but we just want to let you know that although we're, spread across the country, we've definitely been thinking about you, and our hearts are with you, and we're following the news. And of course, with the COVID crisis, we often spend some time talking about your mental health and money mindset and all those kinds of things. So we have next week we are going to have a great guest speaker. Lynn Sumida is going to be here, and we're going to talk about, I love the topic, uncertainty. Who the fuck wants that? So that's next week's talk. We're going to be helping people kind of navigate these uncertain times. So this is going to be a great session, and we've got 3 or 4 more of these coming up. I think we're going until May 27th with our free West Coast Wednesdays. And we've got lots of great guests coming up, so I'll start to post those in the next couple of weeks. So let's see, anything else? Yep, looks like that's most of the questions. So let's say bye-bye for tonight. And a huge thank you to Corey and Lynn from Braintree Financial Solutions, and of course, Sherry Krause from Royal LePage Coast Capital. And we will see you next Wednesday. And I hope you are enjoying the webinars. Please send us your feedback and questions, comments, concerns. I'll have it posted. And thank you again for joining us. Have a great night and happy Earth Day. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody. Good night.
Hi, everyone.
Good night. Bye. Thank you.